Bridges, you said several times, you've used a phrase, I want to make sure I understand what you mean by it. You've referred to people with a capacity for pregnancy. Would that be women?
Many women, cis women, have the capacity for pregnancy. Many cis women do not have the capacity for pregnancy. There are also trans men who are capable of pregnancy, as well as non-binary people who are capable of pregnancy.
So this isn't really a women's rights issue.
We can recognize that this impacts women while also recognizing that it impacts other groups. Those things are not mutually exclusive, Senator Hawley.
Oh, so your view is that the core of this right then is about what?
So I want to recognize that your line of questioning is transphobic, and it opens up trans people to violence by not recognizing them.
Wow, you're saying that I'm opening up people to violence by asking whether or not women are the folks who can have pregnancies?
So I want to note that 1 out of 5 transgender persons have attempted suicide. So I think it's important
because of my line of questioning?
Because,
so we can't talk about it?
Because denying that trans people exist and pretending not to know that they exist
I'm
is
denying
dangerous.
that trans people exist by asking you if you're talking about women having pregnancies?
Do you believe that men can get pregnant?
No, I don't think women can get
So
pregnant.
you are denying that trans people exist?
And that leads to violence? Is this how you run your classroom? Are students allowed to question you?
Absolutely.
Or are they also treated like this, where
No,
they're told that they're opening up people to violence?
We have a good time in my class. You should join.
Oh, I bet.
You might learn a lot.
Wow, I would learn a lot. I've learned a lot just in this
I know,
exchange.
absolutely.
Extraordinary.
Yep.
Panel, Mr. Crenshaw, I recognize you.
Thank you, my colleague. Thank you to my colleague, and I do have a few questions. I want to say a few things. First, we keep hearing this is a politicized issue. This is a manufactured culture war. I got to say, we aren't the ones who did that. We aren't the ones that came up with this radical new movement that is performing permanent physiological changes to children with no evidence of any benefits. We didn't start that. We're just trying to stop it. Questions are for Dr. McNamara. I just want to ask you, honestly, you're not concerned about the unknown effects of puberty blockers, hormones, and surgical interventions in kids, the long-term effects, not concerned about that?
Everything I've said here today comes from a place of deep honesty and conviction for the care that I provide and the community that I'm a part of.
You've said that we've cherry-picked data. How do you mean how do you mean that?
So it is very unscientific and flawed to pick a single study or a single statistic and to discuss it in isolation.
Totally agree.
Medical experts are able to talk about all of the evidence as a whole.
Totally agree. So it's good to look at systematic reviews, right? That's the gold standard of evidence when you're trying to understand whether something works or whether it doesn't. So the British Journal of Medicine looked at 61 systematic reviews with the conclusion that, quote, there is great uncertainty about the effects of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries in young people. Journal of Endocrine Society came up with the same conclusion, even the American Academy of Pediatrics. They all cite the lack of evidence. And so here's the thing. If you're doing a therapy, and it's, temporary, whatever, fine, maybe let's try it, let's see if it works. But when you're talking about permanent physiological changes, do you not agree, just from an ethical standpoint, that you might want extremely strong evidence of the benefits? And there is no systematic review that states that there is strong evidence of benefits.
Sir, are you aware of how the quality evidence grading system works and how it's applied?
Yeah, we've read through it. That's why I'm citing these journals. So which journal says something different? We should have that debate. Tell me a journal that has done systematic reviews that cites different evidence, that cites strong evidence for benefits of these therapies.
The standards of care were developed based on extensive...
You're not telling me any journal, you're not telling me any study. Don't say standards of care.
Yeah. So...
Tell me one.
The standards of care.
That's the standards of care. That's not a journal. That's not a study. That's not an organization. That's not an institution. You're just saying words. Name one study.
Yeah.
I'm out of time. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Dunn yields back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Title IX was a landmark civil rights law. It helped create the incredible breadth of women's sports and girls' sports that we see across the country. I believe in girls' sports. I believe in women's sports. I'm the proud father of 2 daughters who are both athletes. I think participating in competitive sports is a wonderful thing for a young girl. I think it is a wonderful thing for a woman. And I think, unfortunately, today's Democrat Party has decided that women's sports and girls' sports no longer matters. and they're willing to push radical legislation designed to destroy girls' sports and women's sports. Ms. Gaines, I want to thank you for your courage. Now, let me ask you, as someone who's competed at the elite level, in your experience, is there a difference between women and men?
Of course. I think we learned this at a very young age, watching even 12 and unders play. Going through puberty causes irreversible advantage, that no matter the training, no matter the diet, no matter any alterable change you can make, will overcome that male advantage. Especially in sports like swimming, where lung capacity matters so much. Even something as silly as throat size, men have on average a 40% larger throat, which sounds like it's nothing, but when you're grasping for air, that 40% larger throat makes a huge difference in athletic success, not to mention height. You guys know the differences.
Ms. Robinson, do you agree with Ms. Gaines that there's a difference between women and men?
If the question is about trans women,
I'm just asking, is there a difference between women and men?
what I can say is that the NCAA has rules in place. They've had rules in place for the last decade, and when this competition
Okay,
happened,
I'm going to try again.
the rules were clear.
Do you believe there's a difference between women and men? It's a yes/no question. Do you believe there's a difference?
Oh, I think that we're talking about this case with the NCAA.
No, I'm asking a question. Do you believe there's a difference between women and men? Most people could answer this very simply. I'm curious if you're willing to do so.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just putting it into the context of the
Is that a yes?
conversation that we're having. I think that there are definitions related to sex.
Is
but
that
I
a
also
yes?
think
So I'm
that when
trying to
we're-
get a yes or no. I'm not trying to get a speech.
I'm
Is there a difference between women and men?
I think that there are definitions for biological sex.
Okay, so you're
which
not
is
answering
different
that.
than
Let me ask
gender.
you this question then. Why do women's sports exist? If you can't define a difference between women and men, why not abolish women's sports and just tell little girls to swim with little boys and see who wins?
Oh, I'm simply saying that that sex
My
is different
question,
than gender.
why
and I do believe
why
that
do
women's sports have a great
exist?
value. I mean, Senator, I'll tell you right
Ms.
now.
Robinson, please answer the question I'm asking you.
Absolutely.
Why do women's sports exist?
I think that there are so many positive benefits to sports.
But
I mean,
why have a
we've talked
separate
about it here
category for
today.
women? If there's no difference between women and men, why to have women's sports?
I'm saying that there's a difference between sex and gender, and that the NCAA has rules in place, which they have for the last decade.
Mr. Chairman,
which
I would
determine
like
that
to enter into
related
the
to
record an
participation.
article from Duke Law called Comparing Athletic Performances for the Best Elite Women to Boys and Men. And it goes through examining in 2017 the top records for women in the world in various track and field events. So, for example, in the 100 meter, the top record for women in the world was 10.71 seconds. Now, that record for the number one woman in the world in 2017 was, in the year 2017, broken by 124 boys under 18. In that same year, the record for the number one competing woman in the 100-meter dash in the world was broken by a total of 2,474 men. If the radical Democrat agenda to destroy girls' sports and women's sports succeeds, little girls will not have a chance to compete. So I ask unanimous consent that this article be entered into the record.
Without objection. Senator Padilla?
Do you believe that Leah Thomas had an advantage in swimming because she was a biological male who transitioned sometime late in college?
I am not a sports medicine physician. I can only relate to the stand of the Sports Medicine Federal International Association.
What do they say?
They do not recommend the exclusion of transgender individuals
Do they
in sports.
believe it's fair for Leah Thomas, who spent 3 years swimming for the men's team in the senior year of college, to compete in the women's division? They think that's okay?
As a medical professional, I don't have the scientific expertise
let me tell you
to
as a
provide an
person.
opinion.
Let me tell you as a person. You don't need a medical degree. This is not okay. This is definitely not okay. You work all your life training as a swimmer, competing against biological girls, and you wind up your senior in college competing with somebody who 3 years swam as a guy. And you lose. Ms. Robinson, do 80% of Americans support biological males competing in women's athletics?
I can say more than 70% of Americans believe that the
No, it's
rash of attacks on
No,
trans
it's a
sports
really
is the wrong political
simple
priority.
question. Do 80% of Americans support biological males participating in female sports?
I mean, what I can't verify that, but what I can
Well,
say
I
is
can
that
tell you it's not even close. That there's nothing wrong with you if you have a problem with Miss Gaines feeling cheated. There's nothing wrong with you if you have a problem with Miss Gaines feeling uncomfortable in a locker room. There's nothing wrong with you. Now, we'll sort this out as a nation, but this idea that something's wrong with her because she feels cheated is absurd. You have every right to feel that way. And I imagine a lot of young ladies do feel uncomfortable being in a locker room under the situation you described.
Ms. Robinson, I want to follow up by trying to understand your answer to one of Senator Cruz's questions. And this is really a question, not a suggestion. Do I understand your position to be that there are two sexes, but there can be more than two genders?
I wouldn't even say two, and we've got Dr. Lopez here as well, but there's also the definition of intersex. I think that often in these conversations we're conflating sex and gender, and I do want to affirm here that trans women are women. That is their gender.
Well, but I want to start with sex. Okay, there's male, there's female. When a baby's born, before the baby has had time to even have a sense of self, there's male, female, and intersex. There's a third sex.
I believe that is true, but I would defer to Dr. Lopez as I'm not a physician.
Okay. And how many genders are there?
I think the gender is expansive, and the definitions are always growing. Today I can tell you, I talk to young people that talk about non-binary as
more than five.
I think the gender is not a binary, is what I'm trying to say.
Are there more than five genders? I'm just trying to understand. Are there more than five genders?
Well, I mean, I think that there was a time where women wearing pants didn't feel like it was appropriate for their gender, and yet I'm wearing pants today. I think that there are ways that we express our gender that are expansive.
Are there more than five?
I wouldn't subject myself to naming how many genders there are, but what I can say is that gender is a reflection. Excuse me?
There's an infinite number of genders?
I think depending on your culture, there are a lot of different genders that exist. And I can also say that it's a term that's evolving. If you look at young people today, they really don't lean into the binary of only woman and man. So I think that it's incumbent upon us not to legislate on this, but create space for them to explore what their identities are, what their gender identities are.
Let's get back to athletics. I think I understand what you're saying. There are three sexes, male, female, and intersex.
I believe that to be true, but again, I'm not a physician.
And there are an infinite number of genders, because gender is a mental state.
Gender is about expression, and I think that there are a variety of ways that you can express your gender.
Okay, so there's infinite number. All right, let's go back to the biology. Male, female, boy, girl, okay? Biologically, do males have an advantage over females biologically in sports?
Again, I'm not a physician, and I can't speak to that.
What's your real-world experience?
It depends. I mean, there are some people who are born male that I'm faster than if I were to sprint against them, and some that I'm not. Some males that are taller than some women, and some that are shorter.
You don't believe that a biological male has a physical advantage in sports over a biological female?
Not as a definitive statement.
Give me an example. Well, no, I don't think. How many female members of the NBA do you see?
Well, I can say that, there's been this news article about men that think that they could beat Serena Williams in tennis, right? That they think that they could actually score a point on her. And it's just not the case. She is stronger than that.
What's your experience, Ben? Male, female?
Both Serena and Venus lost to the 203rd ranked male tennis player, which they're phenoms for women. My experience, my husband, he swam at University of Kentucky as well. In terms of accolades and in terms of national ranking, I was a much better swimmer than him. He could kick my butt any day of the week without trying.
Okay. I just think, Ms. Robinson, I'm trying to understand where you're coming from. I think you lose a lot of credibility when you don't concede that a biological male has physical advantages over a biological female. I mean, I just think that's a proven fact, and you really hurt your credibility. I understand you want the world to be a better place. I do too, and I don't think people ought to be discriminated against because of an immutable characteristic. I don't. And I think that I think everybody ought to be free to be themselves. And what you do in your bedroom or what I do in my bedroom with a consenting adult is nobody's business. But if what I do in my bedroom with a consenting adult, if I decide I want to tell somebody's child about it, then other people have rights too. And I think parents have rights. And I think biological females have rights to be able to compete fairly in sport. In sports. So I really think you hurt your credibility when you refuse to acknowledge that biological males have an advantage over biological females. It kind of makes me wonder about all your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Kennedy.